My job at Twitter is to ensure user trust, protect user rights, and keep users safe, both from each other and, at times, from themselves. Let's talk about what scale looks like at Twitter. Back in January 2009, we saw more than 2 million new tweets each day on the platform. January 2014, more than 500 million. We were seeing 2 million tweets in less than 6 minutes. That's a 24,900% increase. Now, the vast majority of activity on Twitter puts no one in harm's way. There's no risk involved. My job is to root out and prevent activity that might. Sounds straightforward, right? You might even think it'd be easy, given that I just said the vast majority of activity on Twitter puts no one in harm's way. Why spend so much time searching for potential calamities in innocuous activities? Given the scale that Twitter is at, a 1 in a million chance happens 500 times a day. It's the same for other companies dealing at this sort of scale. For us, edge cases, those rare situations that are unlikely to occur, are more like norms. Say 99.999% of tweets pose no risk to anyone. There's no threat involved. Maybe people are documenting travel landmarks like Australia's Heart Reef, or tweeting about a concert they're attending, or sharing pictures of cute baby animals. After you take out that 99.999%, that tiny percentage of tweets remaining works out to roughly 150,000 per month. The sheer scale of what we're dealing with makes for a challenge. You know what else makes my role particularly challenging? People do weird things. And I have to figure out what they're doing, why, and whether or not there's risk involved, often without much in terms of context or background. I'm going to show you some examples that I've run into during my time at Twitter. These are all real examples of situations that at first seemed cut and dried, but the truth of the matter was something altogether different. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and sometimes the guilty. We'll start off easy. If you saw a tweet that only said this, you might think to yourself, that looks like abuse. After all, why would you want to receive the message, yo, bitch? Now, I try to stay relatively hip to the latest trends and memes, so I knew that yo, bitch was also often a common greeting between friends, as well as being a popular Breaking Bad reference. I will admit that I did not expect to encounter a fourth use case. It turns out it is also used on Twitter when people are role-playing as dogs. And in fact, in that case, it's not only not abusive, it's technically just an accurate greeting. So, okay, determining whether or not something is abusive without context, definitely hard. Let's look at spam. Here's an example of an account engaged in classic spammer behavior, sending the exact same message to thousands of people. While this is a mock-up I put together using my account, we see accounts doing this all the time. Seems pretty straightforward. We should just automatically suspend accounts engaging in this kind of behavior. Turns out there's some exceptions to that rule. Turns out that that message could also be a notification you signed up for that the International Space Station is passing overhead because you wanted to go outside and see if you could see it. You're not going to get that chance if we mistakenly suspend the account thinking it's spam. Okay, let's make the stakes higher. Back to my account, again exhibiting classic behavior. This time it's sending the same message and link. This is often indicative of something called phishing, somebody trying to steal another person's account information by directing them to another website. That's pretty clearly not a good thing. we want to and do suspend accounts engaging in that kind of behavior. So why are the stakes higher for this? Well, this could also be a bystander at a rally who managed to record a video of a police officer beating a nonviolent protester who's trying to let the world know what's happening. We don't want to gamble on potentially silencing that crucial speech by classifying it as spam and suspending it. That means we evaluate hundreds of parameters when looking at account behaviors, and even then we can still get it wrong and have to reevaluate. Now, given the sorts of challenges I'm up against, it's crucial that I not only predict, but also design protections for the unexpected. And that's not just an issue for me or for Twitter, it's an issue for you. It's an issue for anybody who's building or creating something that you think is going to be amazing and will let people do awesome things. So what do? I pause and I think, how could all of this go horribly wrong? I visualize catastrophe. And that's hard. There's a sort of inherent cognitive dissonance in doing that. Like when you're writing your wedding vows at the same time as your prenuptial agreement. But you still have to do it, particularly if you're marrying 500 million tweets per day. What do I mean by visualize catastrophe? I try to think of how something is, say, benign and innocuous as a picture of a cat could lead to death and what to do to prevent that, which happens to be my next example. This is my cat, Eli. We wanted to give users the ability to add photos to their tweets. A picture's worth 1,000 words, you only get 140 characters, you add a photo to your tweet, look at how much more content you've got now. There's all sorts of great things you can do by adding a photo to a tweet. My job isn't to think of those. It's to think of what could go wrong. How could this picture lead to my death? Well, here's one possibility. There's more in that picture than just a cat. There's geodata. When you take a picture with your smartphone or digital camera, there's a lot of additional information saved along in that image. In fact, this image also contains the equivalent of this, more specifically, this. Sure, it's not likely that someone's going to try to track me down and do me harm based upon image data associated with a picture I took of my cat, but I start by assuming the worst will happen. That's why when we launched photos on Twitter, we made the decision to strip that geodata out. If I start by assuming the worst and work backwards, I can make sure that the protections we build work for both expected and unexpected use cases. Given that I spend my days and nights imagining the worst that could happen, it wouldn't be surprising if my worldview was gloomy. It's not. The vast majority of interactions I see, and I see a lot, believe me, are positive. People reaching out to help or to connect or share information with each other. It's just that for those of us dealing with scale, for those of us tasked with keeping people safe, we have to assume the worst will happen. Because for us, a 1 in a million chance is pretty good odds. Thank you.
Now, there's growing pressure on the social network Twitter to do more to tackle the problem of abusive and threatening tweets. The Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, today called the company's response inadequate after several prominent women reported receiving rape threats. And in the past hour, the Metropolitan Police said it had arrested a 25-year-old man on suspicion of harassment. In a moment, I'll be speaking to Twitter's head of trust and safety from their headquarters in San Francisco. But first, here's OBrien.
I spent today in the parallel universe that is Twitter. Trolling, it turns out, covers a multitude of sins, from the funny to the stupid, to the annoying, to the misogynistic, to the criminal. Let's start with one that's stupid, annoying, and misogynistic. Oliver Rawlings is a student. Mary Beard, a famous historian and broadcaster. Yesterday, he objected to her appearance on a radio show and decided to send her this tweet. "Retweet this, you filthy old I bet your is disgusting." Mary Beard retweeted the abuse, and it would seem a family friend of Mr. Rawlings follows Mary Beard. He threatened to tell Mr. Rawlings' mammy, who patently came down on Mr. Rawlings like a ton of bricks, because about 30 minutes later, he apologised profusely. Mary Beard accepted. The troll was looking decidedly sheepish. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum now. Stella Creasy, the MP leading the clean-up charge, continued getting more abuse today, like this, just this afternoon. She's been retweeting them throughout the day. Whether it was the threat of police or something else, the troll had an online crisis of conscience and started apologising. By the end of the day, he had disappeared off the face of the web. Then John Whittingdale, the chair of the Culture Select Committee, rode into the row, announcing that they'd be calling Twitter in front of the committee this autumn.
Well, I think at the moment it is plain that it is not sufficiently easy or quick to have something removed, which is unacceptable. Now, I understand that Twitter have now said that they're looking at installing some kind of button which will allow people to identify very fast that some content is unacceptable. But we'll need to see the detail of what they propose and whether that is going to be sufficient.
Yesterday, Twitter announced a new report abuse facility within tweets, but not before the whole thing had gone toxic. Not helped, for example, by the fact that a few days ago, one Twitter boss protected his tweets so people like Stella Creasy MP couldn't contact him. It felt at the time as if Twitter wasn't listening. They are now.
Porrick O'Brien reporting. Well, joining me now from our studio in San Francisco is Twitter's head of trust and safety, Del Harvey. Do you accept you've messed this up in Britain?
It's a heck of an opening. Thanks for having me here. So I think that what I would ask is, what part of this in particular are you speaking to? I think there's been a lot of misconceptions. We haven't done ourselves any favors, certainly in terms of making sure that users know about what we already have in place for them and the improvements we've been making. But in terms of things going awry, give me a little more specifics in terms of what you would be
Well, look, the victims of this abuse, the feminist campaigner, Ms. Criado Perez, specifically tried to contact a fairly senior Twitter executive, the head of news and journalism in your organisation. He did not reply. He blocked her and closed down his account. Now, the first law of Twitter is you engage. And if you're not engaging with the people who are victims of abuse on Twitter, you're messing things up.
The details of that interaction aside, part of the reason that we have the process that we do, which is the ticketing system, which is the forms, which is the button that we introduced 3 weeks ago on iOS and mobile web, where you can report a tweet just from that button, that's to make sure that those reports get to the right place. And, in every company, different people do different things. We want to make sure that those reports get to the right team and the right people as quickly as possible so they can actually take action on it. And part of what we're working to fix and part of what we're doing with expanding how we're rolling out that report as abuse is making sure that it's really easy for users to find the process they need to use to get it to the team as quickly as possible so they don't have an experience.
It's a very convoluted form that you've got to fill in. And if you're getting, rape threats every minute, you can't fill in a form for every threat. And that's what happened at the weekend. I mean, you need some sort of system that is simpler and quicker, surely. I mean, because you're a massive social network around the world. There's a huge amount of abuse, not just women abuse in Britain, but I mean, there's been racist abuse and all sorts of abuse on Twitter that presumably is just kind of going unchecked.
I think there's sometimes a perception that Twitter is the Wild West, that there are no rules. There are rules. We are working on making the forms easier to use. We have the forums primarily because it's a balance between making it really easy to report content, but then also preventing others from using those forums to try to silence people who maybe they just don't agree with. Even in the current structure of the reporting process, we see a lot of accounts reported not because they were actually posting harassing content or threats or anything else, but just because they don't agree with what the other person said. So there's this balance between making it where, you know, you can just say, okay, well, this is abusive, and then making it where you actually have to provide some context around it. Well, but the case of the multiple attackers or the multiple accounts that you highlighted is one of the areas that we're working to try to make it so that, you know, it's not this overwhelming burden when you're already feeling overwhelmed, right? The last thing we want to do is make you feel worse.
There's this petition going around, though, that is asking you to go further and is saying, you know, you should be looking at basically striking people off Twitter, removing people, closing accounts, and being much more, you know, reactive to people's complaints. Are you going to sort of change your policies?
I'm not sure of I'm not sure if that's the petition that I'm aware of. We actually suspend people now who engage in abuse or harassment or who post violent threats. It's something that we've done for some time. And, you know, one of the things that I'm really proud of with the team is that we've been consistently evolving our policies. We've been listening to feedback. So something that, you know, a year ago might not have constituted something where we would suspend an account is now something that, yeah, that account will be suspended if we get that reported to us. And that's part of the reason that the feedback that we've gotten in this has been really helpful, because it does help us make sure that we're communicating what we've done and what we're doing and where we want user input.
So just briefly, I mean, it's likely you or somebody else from Twitter is going to be called before British MPs at the Culture, Media and Sport Committee. It doesn't sound like you're going to be apologising for anything.
I don't think that's the case. I mean, quite frankly, any time that someone feels we weren't responsive or feels that they weren't heard or feels as though we were insensitive to something like that, I absolutely don't ever want that to happen. And that's part of the reason that we are always trying to improve our policies and processes and make these things easier. I'm not saying that we can't do better. I'm saying that we're listening and we want your feedback on what better looks like for you.
Del Harvey, thanks very much indeed for joining us tonight. John.
Well, joining us now from West London is Toby Young, Associate Editor of The Spectator, whose tweets have been called sexist. And with me in the studio is Helen Lewis, the Deputy Editor of The New Statesman, herself the target of sexist remarks. Are you encouraged by what the executive from Twitter has just said?
Not really. I mean, Twitter has got a huge PR problem over this, I think. That's the first interview I've actually seen where you managed to flush someone out from Twitter to come and talk about this. And they are a media company, but they don't behave like one. And that's probably happened because most journalists are on Twitter. You're on Twitter, I'm on Twitter, Toby's on Twitter. We haven't really given them the scrutiny that a media organisation would get so far.
Toby Young, what did you make of what you've just heard?
Well, she wasn't very polished, but then that's one of the beauties of Twitter. It is a bit rough and ready. I think Twitter should be congratulated for having human moderators. And that's why the reporting process is so slow and cumbersome, because if it was any easier, the human moderators would quickly become overwhelmed. Facebook does have a wholly automatic reporting process, which is wholly computerized, and it's much simpler and easier to report abuse on Facebook than it is on Twitter, where you have to fill out all these forms. But the problem is that system is susceptible to abuse, because if someone's Facebook message or Facebook page gets flagged up enough times as abusive, whether it is or not, it automatically gets deleted. Twitter are trying to be responsible about this, but the problem is they just don't have the manpower to process the reports of abuse that are flooding in, which is why they have to make the reporting process so cumbersome.
And that is a genuine difficulty, isn't it? Because one of the joys of Twitter, you know, where it works, is that it's a wonderful exchange of links and of conversation.
Yeah, and they absolutely don't want to go down the route of Facebook of requiring real names and linking to real email addresses. So that is a problem. It's always going to be much more kind of rumbustious. The problem is that I've seen several examples of direct rape threats that have been, the account has not been suspended for 24, 48 hours. And that's, the first step would be simply for them to enforce the rules that they already have.
But the difficulty is that a lot of this, of the rape stuff, for example, appears, I mean, one can't judge anything because there are maybe sub judice or whatever, appears to be sort of pranksters who think it's clever to go and do that, but have no actual, what they call in the law, mens rea, to actually commit rape.
Yeah, and that's one thing we know about online abuse, is there's this idea of disinhibition, where people simply don't realise that there will be any real consequences to their actions. And actually, what I really hope is that the fact that several people have been arrested, that won't stop hardcore people who have a social problem wanting to abuse women on the internet. It might stop a silly 17-year-old who just thinks that this is something they can do for a laugh, and there will be no consequences.
Toby Young, do you think people are clear of the line between sexist observation and outright abuse?
I don't think that line is particularly clear, and it's the fuzziness of that line which makes Twitter's job quite difficult. I'll give you an example. Caitlin Moran, the feminist journalist and author, recently wrote a tweet in which she said she wanted to castrate a stand-up comedian who got into a spat with her husband, who's a music critic. Now, I don't think anyone thought that she really meant that. It wasn't really a threat, but you have to have a sophisticated enough process in place to distinguish between those sorts of hyperbolic, over-the-top responses and genuine threats. And the problem is, the troll is often the person in the argument who just has less followers. If you're famous, you can get away with this sort of abuse. If you're not, you end up getting arrested and sent to prison. And Twitter has to have a sophisticated enough process in place, I think, to be able to distinguish between genuine threats and these sorts of hyperbolic, over-the-top, Wild West-style remarks.
That briefly is true.
Well, there's one big problem with this, which is that most male journalists, and no disrespect to Toby, have simultaneously said that they've had terrible abuse and why are women complaining? And you can't really hold those two thoughts in your head at the same time. That's my problem.
Helen Lewis, Toby Young, thank you both very warmly. Christian.
Thanks. The C4 News hashtag's going mad. Now, more
Hi there. Hopefully this talk will also be a mixture of tears and making you want to kiss somebody. So we'll keep expectations low. It may just be tears. No promises. So as she said, I am Del Harvey. I am the VP of Trust and Safety at Twitter, which sounds either vaguely Orwellian or at least gently reassuring. And my job is to ensure user trust, protect user rights, and keep users safe, both from each other and at times from themselves. And I do all of that with a healthy dose of visualizing catastrophe. I'm also the executive sponsor of Twitter Open, which is Twitter's... It's like you guys know what it is already. It's Twitter's ERG, Employee Resource Group, for the LGBTQA tweeps, as we like to call them, at Twitter. Some of us like to call them tweeps, not maybe everyone. All of that is to say, I think it's safe to say I fall relatively squarely into the category of lesbians who tech. So, well, perhaps lesbian who techs in the singular form, but I am delighted to be here today to talk to you about cybersecurity. So, what is cybersecurity anyway? Well, Google says it's this. There you go, saved you like 30 seconds. And the thing is there's actually a lot of different things that cybersecurity can refer to. It can be privacy, it can be confidentiality, it can be corporate security or data security, or whether or not your social media account has been hacked by somebody. It can refer to all of those things. And because it can refer to all of those things, as framed by this extremely bastardized quote from Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart's concurrence in Jacob Ellis versus Ohio, which perhaps for some of you who are big Supreme Court fans, you might recognize there's like two. You might recognize the opinion. Those of you who do not, it is where the famous colloquialism, "I know it when I see it," came from. Fun fact, that's all you'll learn in this entire talk, but there you go. Got it in the first 2.5 minutes. So, great. Cybersecurity, all of these things more. I'm going to tell you my absolute top 5, you must do these things for cybersecurity. And here's the thing, we've been telling you to do these things for like the past 10 years. Some of you still aren't doing them. Please stop that, please do them. We're telling you them for a reason. And then we're going to talk about something else that ties really closely to cybersecurity. It's going to be thrilling. So, without further ado, my top 5 greatest cybersecurity hits. Please, I don't care if you use LastPassword, I don't care if you use 1Password, I don't care if you use LastPass or some other version, but use a password manager. It's going to keep you from typing your password into phishing sites. It's going to make it so that you don't use the same password on multiple sites, because none of you would do that, right? You use a different password for every single site, right? I'll assume that the laughter is in just violent agreement with that concept. Good. Good. Keep your system software updated. Have an antivirus and a malware scanner, even if you're on a Mac. More and more people are on Macs, which means they're better and better targets, which means please use them. It's not that hard, guys. There's free ones. Do it. Update your parents so that they're doing it too, because that's what I do every time I go home, is just try to keep them up to date. 2-factor authentication, if a site offers it, use it, please. Password protect all your electronic devices, your phone, your laptop. Change the default password on your router from the login of admin. Maybe protect that home network. You can use a really funny title. I have a home network that's The Land Before Time and a guest network that's Tell My Wife I Love Her. Come on, this is a golden opportunity for puns. Take advantage of it. I'll also give you La Femme Net Kita. Think about it. Yeah, free one. Now, one note, if you are going to a protest or something like that where you think you might be arrested or you're just concerned you might be arrested, fun tip, turn off Touch ID or key or thumbprint recognition to unlock your electronic device. There are currently cases going on about whether or not you can be forced to unlock your electronic devices using your thumbprint. If it is just password protected, there is no question you cannot be forced to unlock it the same way. So just shut it off if you're planning on getting arrested tonight. Just saying, like, tips to live by. So now that that's all said, you guys are going to do all 5 of these religiously. Thank you. I feel like I've made the world a better place now. Let's talk about a less discussed aspect of cybersecurity. I want to talk about privacy through obscurity instead. This is also my cat, so FYI. I didn't know if it was pandering to put up a picture of my cat, but I went with it. So this guy, Woodrow Hartzog, he's an assistant professor of law at Stanford, has written a lot about the concept of obscurity by design. He's talked about obscurity by design within websites and within code and that sort of thing. And obscurity by design is actually also something that can apply to your social media and your online presence. So you can regain a lot of your social media privacy through obscurity. Now, 20 years ago, this wasn't much of an issue because we weren't yet in the age of big data, right? But now we are, right? Imagine me like moonwalking or something as I talk about this, but I'm in heels, so no. We could live our lives pretty publicly and still assume that we had a default to privacy because it wasn't super easy or straightforward to take 100 or 1,000 discrete, and that's ETE, not EET, pieces of information and assemble them into a larger picture of who somebody is or what they're doing. Well, obscurity has never been an absolute guarantee of safety. If somebody is determined enough, they're going to be able to piece together an overview of information. But the amount of effort involved in doing so can serve to dissuade all but the most determined. Now, however, given the sheer amount of information that is available online, it's trivial for even a hobbyist to put together pieces of information and know more about you than you might be totally comfortable with them knowing. I say hobbyist because sometimes I do this for fun. So what can you do about that? Hartzog talks about 4 main factors of obscurity. He says searchability, unprotected access, identification, and clarity. I roughly agree with them, but I tweak the second and fourth to access controls and context and clarity. I only get 10 minutes, so you're getting the lightning version of all of this. I could probably talk faster, but you'll get what you get. So let's dive a little bit deeper into each of these. The idea is that the more that you gain control over one of these areas, the more your obscurity and privacy improves. And the whole point of this is not to tell you, you must be completely private. No one must have any idea what's going on. It's to give you the information that you might need in order to take control and to make your own decisions as to how visible you are and what your online footprint is. Searchability is all about how accessible your social media accounts are. How easy is it to find them? How easy is it to find the content that you produce? There's lots of ways to reduce that, both online and offline. Look at sites like familytreenow.com or Spokeo and find out just how much information is about you, including where you live, who your relatives are, what the last 5 addresses you've lived at are. That's for free. People can find that out really easily. You can opt out, but you have to know to go do it. So here's your note. Maybe go do that. Access controls are really closely tied to searchability. They're about how easy it is for people to, once they've found you, see or scrape or index the information. If you're locking down who can see certain pieces of information, who can see your posts, who can see your friend list, who can tag you in pictures, all of that are forms of access controls that you have and that you can take steps to reduce your visibility around. Identification, unsurprisingly, it's all about any information that's directly tied to you, your work email, your work phone number, your personal phone number. Don't use your work email on a personal social media account if you don't want people to be able to tie it back to you. These are things that are pretty straightforward, but again, keep in mind, even something like your phone number, and then people who have your phone number in their contacts list can be used to identify and surface your social media accounts to other people without you even thinking that they would know that it was yours. Context and clarity are all about how easy it is for somebody else to understand what they're seeing about you. Some information might always be public, like your profile picture, but it doesn't have to be of your face. Similarly, even when disclosing or sharing information, you can do it in ways that are only understandable to a set group of people. What Dana Boyd, a principal researcher at Microsoft, describes as the art of social steganography, which is kind of a cool name, or hiding information in plain sight by leveraging shared knowledge and cues embedded in particular social contexts. You can see why she went with social steganography instead of the second one. All of that said, very quickly, thank you for listening. My hope is that this very, very quick talk has given you at least a little bit more information than you had before, or a little more context to think about that information in, and that you feel a little more empowered to take control of these areas. If you're interested in learning more about what I do or how I do it, or finding out more about sites where you can go reduce your online footprint, please feel free to come by the Twitter booth at the Recruiting Pavilion. And I leave you with the view, visualize catastrophe. It's like visualizing peace, but more preventative. Thank you.